I lost my family when I was 8 years old. I believe my best buddy killed them as they were upstairs in my room. Since I have been carrying this weight about with me for a long time, I am now 25 years old. I believe that putting it in writing would help me deal with many of the problems I face every day. Even though I didn't do anything wrong, I feel a lot of guilt because I've done things in the past that I'm not proud of and have always justified them by blaming them on something that happened today. Nobody knows who killed my family. The murderer is believed to have fled the scene and was never apprehended. But I have a horrible suspicion that my best friend is the one responsible. My imaginary friend Timothy was my best friend. Thus, I am certain that this is not possible. Although having an imaginary friend may seem rather old, I didn't have any real friends. For some reason, I immediately attracted the ire of other kids. As a small child, I clearly recall wanting to join a game of tag or cowboys and Indians, only to be told no time and time again. I could always count on Timothy to be there for me. In my old room, he resided in the cabinet, and Indians were just told no. He had dazzling blonde hair, blue eyes, and the same age as me, but he dressed much older than his actual age. He appeared to be dressed in a manner reminiscent to my grandfather. My youth was frequently spent alone. My older sister was a saint in their eyes, whereas my father and mother were heavy drinkers. But in reality, she used to intimidate and hurt me physically. She even once pushed me down the stairs when I refused to give her my cookie. My parents, however, would consistently throw me down the stairs if I refused to give her my cookie. But my parents would always point the finger at me or just tell me to be more resilient. Stop being such a wimp, they would always tell me about this girl. She towered over me at 13 years old, so even at the age of 8, I felt in danger and afraid. In between all of the drinking and suffering, there were, however, a few fleetingly enjoyable moments that I can still recall. It was one of those days when my parents took us to the zoo and we behaved like a family the entire time. There was no drinking and no verbal or physical abuse, which made it seem unreal. No drinking, no physical or verbal abuse, just a family all day long. Timothy was upset when I arrived home because I had been gone all day. I told him how amazing it was and how it felt like I was a normal family member. He predicted that relationship wouldn't last and that I needed assistance. He was right as usual, since that evening my parents left the house and my sister took care of me. Up until she returned from her friends, she left me alone for the majority of the evening. She became bored at that point and stormed up the stairs and banged against my door, which sprang open as she yelled for me to wipe her shoes. She rushed into my door after charging up the stairs. She insisted that I wipe her shoes, and it flew open. Naturally, I replied that it was not my responsibility that her shoes were soiled. She then grabbed my neck and pulled it to the ground. She then shoved my head between her feet while screaming at me to lick them clean. I was pleading with her to let go as I clawed at her legs in a fit of rage and misery. I felt her hold on me slipping as she shot backwards out of my room, like if someone had pushed her, and she let out an unrestrained scream. She appeared as though someone had shoved her as she lay on the floor. My door slammed shut as she lay on the ground outside, and the drawers adjacent to it slid across it to prevent anyone from opening it. Timothy was standing next to the entrance, his usually kind countenance distorted with rage as I turned to look at him. He was in my thoughts. He had never been able to interact with things or other people. In my almost fuzzy memory, I could still make out the anger on his face. Was my childhood fantasy this strong? I had always believed that when I was angry, I had pushed my sister away from me and barricaded the door. Then, in my mind, I saw Timothy doing it to bury the unpleasant memories. At this point, Timothy turned and yelled angrily at me. How could I let them treat me like this? How he'd had enough of seeing me suffer this way. I was scared and just didn't know what to say back. He was right. He was always there for me in the aftermath of the abuse. I always thought this was my coping mechanism, almost like I had developed a complex friend, so I wasn't alone in my time of need. Now looking back, he felt so real. Of need. Now, looking back, he felt so real. Later that evening, I heard my parents get home. I could tell they were drunk and heard the muffled complaints from my sister through the door. I cried non-stop in terror as I knew how they would react as I rushed onto my bed and under the blanket. I heard my dad crash up the stairs and rattle my door handle. When he couldn't get any banged and smashed into my door, he was shouting abuse on what I had apparently done to my sister. He said he was going to kill me. I was still hid under my blanket, tears rolling down hid under my blanket, tears rolling down my face. I then heard Timothy's voice. It was a lot calmer than before. Stay hidden. It will all be over soon. The next thing I heard from outside the safety of my room still gives me nightmares. The agonizing screams of my mother and sister. My dad suddenly leaving the other side of my door and running downstairs. A few seconds later, he was begging for his life before letting out a terrifying cry. I heard a large thud, then silence. I waited under my blanket for what seemed like days until I saw the glow of blue flashing lights. Silence. I waited under my blanket for what seemed like days until I saw the glow of blue flashing lights. The muffled sound of people once again sounded from outside my room. My handle soon turned as 2 sets of footsteps walked in. They threw off my blanket as I let out a teary yell. It was the police. I can't really remember too much after that. I didn't understand why my room wasn't barricaded still by the drawers. I never saw Timothy again after that night. I consequently went to live with my paternal grandparents. They were the complete opposite to my parents in every way. Grandparents, they were the complete opposite to my parents in every way. I found out a few years later that they had tried for a number of years to get custody of me and my sister, but were shut out of our lives almost entirely. I asked them many times what happened to my family, and for a long time they refused to tell me any real details other than they were killed by a home intruder. I get why there were so many questions that didn't get answered. My grandfather passed away last week, and I have been helping my grandmother with some of his old stuff. We were looking through his parents' old photo album from some of his old stuff. We were looking through his parents' old photo album from the 1930s. There was a black and white photo of him as a boy. As I looked at the second photo, my stomach dropped. My young grandfather was stood next to a boy that looked identical to Timothy. I uttered through shaky words to my grandmother, "Who was that?" She replied, "That was your grandfather's brother. He tragically died when he was a boy from tuberculosis." I snapped the book closed as my breathing grew deeper. My grandmother was concerned by my reaction. I explained to her about my imaginary friend named Timothy. My grandmother was concerned by my reaction. I explained to her about my imaginary friend named Timothy I had when I was a boy, how he always looked out for me and that he looked exactly like the boy in the photo. She said that maybe I had seen a photo of him when I was young and imagined him in real life, but I can't think of when I would have seen the photo of him. It makes me wonder, looking back, did my overactive imagination create Timothy, or was it actually really him looking out for me? If it was him, though, like his ghost, spirit, or whatever, could he have really killed my family?